Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. It's nice to be back. Today I've got an updated PvP ship tier list for Pyro, which you can use for reference when it comes to planning out your organization's fleets or squadron compositions. There are rare components that need to be looted out in the Pyro and Sand systems, and it's best to know which ships to prioritize outfitting. It's not easy to get those components. It's been 6 months since my last tier list video, and there's been 2 major patches and 3 ship releases. The Hornet Tracker Mark II, the Hornet Ghost Mark II, and the Mirai Guardian, which you'll be surprised to know I ranked each of these fairly low on the tier list, and you guys can see why inside. The list is purely based on combat effectiveness and usefulness in competitive PvP. It doesn't rule out that you can't have success in lower ranked ships, or maybe even ships for other purposes that I have not included in the list. But what is at the top of the list is at the top of competitive PvP. I've also ordered these left to right. The F tier of this list is in no particular order, as majority of it's useless and just not even worth trying to go through it. I hope this provides you guys some insight in Pyro. You know the rules, fly safe or don't, I don't care. And I'll catch you guys at the end of the video. So I've decided to re-record this VOD because the Twitch version, which was me building the list and then discussing the reasoning, just too long of a video. So I've decided to re-record this by myself. If you want to check the VOD of me actually building this thing, it'll be in my YouTube live vlog, yeah? So just go ahead and find the video if you want. Either way, let's break this down. So again, just like last time, S is obviously the best. This ascending order, F being the worst. I also have sorted this left to right, putting the best ships to the left, making the way to the edge of that tier on the right. Yeah. Again, this is a combat effectiveness in PvP ship tier list. Yeah. So this isn't just bottlenecked into 1v1s, squads, or large fleets. This is the whole picture. Yeah. This is for reference with Pyro roaming around in the PU, group compositions, a little bit of piracy you could use this for, although piracy is a bit more lenient when it comes to ship choice. But going up head to head with organizations, taking ships to Jump Town, that is what this list is about, yeah? As well as just taking these things into Arena Commander and testing your metal. So I really am confident in this list. I think this is almost entirely accurate. I'm not pushing any agenda or anything with this video. It's just as transparent as I can be, and I'm very confident in where I've placed everything. I would debate tooth and nail on the placement of every one of these ships, and just feel it's very accurate. So let's start. We'll obviously start at the top left. Just like the last ship tier list video I did 6 months ago, the Hornet Mark II F7A. So this is just the absolute king of PvP right now. It's funny, when I made this last video, you could even go back and look at the comments. A lot of people didn't think that was the case, and then about a month after the video came out, everyone had realized that the Hornet Mark IIs were actually the king, and it still sits atop its throne. It has so much firepower. Defensively, it's quite tanky. Its maneuverability is relatively high for the amount of damage it has and everything else in the package. It did receive some nerfs in regards to maneuverability, but you know, it still can hold its ground. It still can play defensive, and it's going to shred you if you get in front of it. This thing, the reality is, it's just the entire package. It has just enough maneuverability to defend itself. Again, more firepower than most ships. It's not easy to third party because the silhouette is actually, you know, kind of like a cross shape. So it's not a big pancake like the Sabre, for example. So it's just, again, yeah, it's got everything. This thing is the absolute king right now. Important to note, you can get these from inside of the executive hangars. It's a 1 in 4 chance. And definitely worth getting. I've got one of these from the exec hangars. I love it. Came with the skin. It's dope. So the Hornet Mark II is just the king. I'd also say this. It's a really easy ship to pick up. You don't have to be an exceptional pilot. It's got a very low skill requirement. and just very easy ship to fly. Yeah, this thing just dominates. Number 2, we got the Firebird. Now, I just made a video before this. Sorry, someone else did, and I uploaded it. But it is a montage of our organization using the Firebirds. Aegis Firebird is a real indication of just how well missile ships can actually be utilized. A lot of people were sleeping on this when it first came out, and it is a force to be reckoned with. The reason is it's kind of the perfect storm of mechanics. We have extremely powerful missile meta. We have a huge payload of missiles. It can arm and launch a lot of missiles at the same time. It has stealth, which we are very much in a stealth meta right now. And most importantly, it has interceptor tunings, meaning it's fast on the streets. It's fast for hit and runs, which is exactly what these missiles excel at. All of a sudden, beep, 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 and then you blow up. So this thing is just absolutely there to strike players down, and is really performing insanely well. In our internal squad scrims that we have in the org, these Firebird pilots are running amok, sometimes coming out MVP on a team. So it's got a low skill requirement. There's definitely more ways you can play it. There's a lot of tips and tricks you can get from it, and can just really be a menace. The skill requirement's very low, and just seriously performing. If you don't want to be dogfighting, shooting your weapons and stuff, and you want to try another approach to combat, stalking, launching missiles, playing poker with your missile warnings and stuff like that, then the Firebird's really a powerful ship right now. And I would rank it number 2. Number 3 is the Gladius. Now, the Gladius has kind of made its way back up the rankings. It's the only light fighter that I put on the S tier, and I barely put it there. But the reasoning it deserves to be at the highest is because it's got really great nose authority, which means the pitch and yaw is at good speeds. It has low oversteer, so there's none of that really kind of slow, laggy feeling across the nose. It doesn't frustrate you with aim. It's a really nice aim experience. The canopy of the cockpit's a really good experience too. You've got that bubble canopy, so you can use head tracking, and it's not in the way. You're not looking at the back of your seat or anything. It's just a well thought out ship, obviously, because it's the number 1 in Squadron 42. It's just performing really well. It's very agile. It's got a good balance of defense and maneuverability. It's a little low on the damage output, I think, is the larger issue with it, on top of, obviously, flight model issues. But the Gladius is performing well, but it's worth noting here that the Gladius is a extremely high skill ceiling ship and floor, meaning it is extremely difficult to push the Gladius to be an S tier ship, and it requires a serious amount of training and a serious amount of skill. But if you get there with it, then you can start outplaying opponents and using strategies to win your fights. Gladius, in a good ship, but requires a lot, which is what we like about light fighters, for sure. But little underpowered. But again, it's just the ceiling of what you can push this thing is actually relatively high. So that's why we rank it S tier. The Mantis is the 4th pick for S tier. The reason I do this is quantum interdiction is the most overlooked mechanic in the history of master modes right now. People do not realize the awesome amount of power this has. Previously in the last flight model, a Mantis would interdict. You would just have to juke it, fly max speed the opposite direction. They're not going to catch up to 1200 speed in time, and then you're going to evade it. The Mantis instead locks everyone to SCM, which means you run out of boost with this thing and you're a sitting duck, right? So you're in big trouble. This thing can cut the flight model or the flight speeds of an entire fight in half. Less than in half. So people are not utilizing this thing enough, and the Mantis is a wicked ship with it. Problem is, there's some downsides to just how awesome Interdiction is at the moment. It comes with really high signatures, meaning it's missile bait. It's also going to get primary targeted, so you have to defend this thing, and a pilot that's going to play the Mantis has to be in a defensive mindset. You are playing defense the entire time, trying to make sure that they don't kill you. You also have to communicate in comms with the rest of your group to make sure you're not interdicting your own teammates when they want to get out, for example, and you're only interdicting your opponents when they're trying to escape. But the Mantis locks down a fight, and Interdiction is just in such a good place right now. It's crazy. Can't recommend this enough. I think any group or squad that's above 6 players needs to incorporate a Mantis every time. Just, it creates a level of control that people just aren't aware of right now. So that is the S tier. Yeah, I put all of those there. I back those choices. Now we're up to A. I've put the Spirit A1. A lot of ground objectives lately in a lot of the content. We've got bunkers, you've got Jump Town, these mission sets, these like smuggling outposts, the drug outposts and stuff like that, where people are selling their goods. The Spirit A1 is just in a great place, and kind of replaced the larger bomber, the A2. So bombing is just an awesome mechanic, and since the A2 now flies slower in atmosphere, the Spirit A1 is more about precision bombing. And bombing is just in such a good place. So I put the Spirit A1 at the top of A, because I think any mission set that involves anything ground, bringing Spirit A1s is just an awesome amount of power. Problem is, for example, when you're flying with the A2, the bombs can hit you. You're a slow approaching gigantic ship that is both bulky and obvious, so people will plan and run away from the bombs before they land. With the Spirit A1, they don't get that choice, and it's got the speed to blast through and actually deliver the bombs quickly before people can react, etc. So just a better option, more likely to survive. You need to be more precise, and the bomb radius of this explosion isn't of consequence. You know, you drop a Precision A1 bomb on Jump Town, it's going to smoke the whole facility. So is the A2. But you drown someone in, 5 feet of water is the same as drowning in 30 feet. It is still drowned. So, worth using the Spirit A1. I truly think it's a really good PU ship specifically right now. Second is the Antares. Antares has the interdiction mechanic, which we absolutely love. But most importantly, and the reason I rank it so high, is because it's got interceptor tuning. So the reason it's not in the S category is because it's a 2-player requirement. The second player is needed to be in the mount to activate the interdiction and stuff like that. But this thing is really powerful, and can be used with some serious precision. You can isolate targets to interdict them, make sure they don't escape. They definitely can't escape you. If people go on you, you can lean on the interceptor tuning to get out with speed. The Antares, I just rank high. Yeah, I think it's grossly misused, and I think there's a lot of potential there. The only issue is that 2-player requirement. So I think bringing an Antares to a group fight where you're expecting similar numbers, you wouldn't want to commit to unless you're above 7 players, which is where you can kind of mask the being a ship down, for example. But again, just a great ship. Piracy, PvP, protecting your own interdiction, so you playing defense is much easier. Pursuit is much easier. It's just a really strong ship. The only downside and the only thing stopping this thing from being an absolute menace, again, is the 2-player requirement. Throw a logistics guy in the back of this thing, tell him the big red button to press and when to press it, and you're on your way. Third is the Blade. The reason I put the Blade in here is because it has an awesome amount of damage to it. It's got some really nice flight characteristics. I despise the yaw meta, which means you turn the ship horizontal. But a really powerful combination. The bat style shape is really difficult to aim at. When it's strafing with its verticals, it's extremely hard to shoot at because it's a tiny profile to hit with the pip, and an awesome amount of damage for a light fighter. The downsides and the reason it doesn't rank higher is because the cockpit experience is extremely outdated. It's really difficult to use head tracking in this thing. It's an ugly, ugly cockpit. Definitely on the way to being replaced with Squadron 42's release, but a menace of a ship right now. This thing won the tournament and just knocked all of the Buccaneer teams out of the tournament. The Blade was soon discovered to be the king of the tournament and the main character, and we even won the Citizen Con stage on the back of a Blade. So a lot of people shift to the Blade after the first day of the tournament. Rightfully so. This thing rolls like no other. It's just got a lot up its sleeve, yeah, if you can tolerate the cockpit experience. And who doesn't love an alien ship? But the Blade, extremely capable, yeah? The fourth for the A tier is the Talon. Talon is so great in atmosphere. It's a nice cockpit experience, although it's difficult when you're rotating to look past 90 degrees because the cockpit doesn't reveal itself past 90, which is kind of frustrating with it. It's my biggest downside to it. The two size 4s recently do more damage now thanks to master modes and the rebalancing of that. But the reason this thing ranks as high as it does is because it's a combination of being tanky, but it has such a great atmospheric flight model. These things are a pleasure to fly in atmosphere and a real strong pick. You fold the wings in, you start playing aggressive using pitch to outturn your opponents in atmosphere, and they won't even get to see you as you do it. So the Talon, mostly in tight atmosphere, is going to be a really solid choice. It's very tanky. It's got a lot of the kit. It's missing damage, I think, is its downside. But just a pretty good ship, yeah. But really excels and ranked here strictly off its just awesome control in atmosphere. Next up is the Polaris. Now, I've put the Polaris in because as far as the role of capital ship, look, I don't think it performs its role of being a torpedo capital ship very well, but it fits the capital ship role pretty well. Reasoning being it's got missile turrets, some big powerful turrets. It doesn't have coverage of the whole thing, but it's got the hangar, it's got the cargo space. It is tanky as heck. And if you fly this thing with your organization, you go up against a group of sweaty pilots, they have to change their composition to take you out if you're going to rule out ramming, right? Which is due to be fixed anyways. But the Polaris is just in a really strong place. It changed the battle space pretty heavily. Makes people, again, reship and come back with different compositions to now deal with your Polaris problem. And is got a lot of new groups venturing into PvP and having quite a bit of success with it. I actually really like the Polaris because it's forcing what was the typical matter of stacking fighters and just using skill and numbers. Now you have to outfit compositions to take these things out and find your way. So again, the Polaris is just a great multi-crew option for the time being and is just so tanky. It's good. It's good. It's a nice little place to stage from. Capable of a lot of things. Gets a lot of players that aren't typically involved in PvP in a very capable position. So we like the Polaris. We just want the torpedoes to kind of be reviewed, I guess. I think the torpedo mechanic is a bit lackluster with PDCs and stuff right now. But that's where we place that. Next up is the Fury. Now, I would rank the Fury higher if it had a quantum drive, but it does not. Problem is the Fury's got a pretty awesome amount of firepower for the fact that it is smaller than a TIE fighter. This thing is zippy, it's agile, it's got high speeds. It's kind of that blend between the light fighter and interceptor tuning. It's got high top speeds. It is a pest to shoot, but if you can get the shots off on it, then it'll lose control, spin out, and die. No quantum drive, meaning you have to prepare for this logistically, whether it's parking Furies inside of Polarises or whatnot, but hard to stage with these things. But it's got very powerful flight, and it's just a really good kit. I'm not a fan of Furies. If you ask me, I'd get rid of it just because tiny microscopic fighters are kind of scumbags, guys. I'm not gonna lie, just because the game doesn't work when you shoot at these things. The hit registration, they just perform bad on the internet. Yeah, impossible to hit almost. Guns aren't up to the task. Neither is the networking in the game. But the Fury is a powerful little ship. That is for sure. Again, the downside's the no quantum jumping around with this thing. So navigation, moving these things around, quite difficult. So you have to stage and come out of something like an 890 or a Polaris, or just spawn them locally. Next up is the Anvil F8. It's a sad, the F8 died a pretty miserable death with master modes, but I rank it at A still just because it's a huge amount of firepower. It is so tanky, so it can buy you time while you're getting attacked to call for aid. If your group is projecting in a tight space, and they can aid you pretty quickly. And if they're not on you and you're getting free roam, meaning you are firing at will on people, fighters especially, you are going to crush them, and you're going to crush them quickly. I tend to lean on F8s to hunt and fight Polarises in a composition or in atmosphere. They perform pretty all right. But you tend to be going after, big whaling when it comes to the F8. This thing's really nice at killing Corsairs, Connies, maybe piracy, contributing to Polaris kills and stuff like that. Use it to punch above its weight, but if you bring this thing out in a squad composition or a PvP fight, you have to really think about your spacing and protect the F8s, because they are very easy to lose the 1v1s in. Almost all the fighters that are above this, the Blade, the Talon, the Hornet, the Gladius, the Fury, and even some of these ships down in the B tier are going to outturn the F8 because it's so sluggish. It kind of flies like one of the old Vanguards. It's a whole lot of damage, a whole lot of hull, a whole lot of defense, and next to no flight. So look at this thing like it's a heavy outfitted helicopter. Yeah, it is not there to dogfight anymore. It's all guns. All guns. Next up, we're on to the B tier. So the Sabre got some buffs recently. It got increased turn rate on pitch. Its stealth got buffed, so it is a very low signature. Full size guns. Reason it doesn't go higher is because, and it would be high, but it's the same problem it's always had. It's a giant flying pancake like this, which is just makes it so susceptible to third party. When it's fighting you on a horizontal profile face on, it's a thin disc, but to the third player it is a giant pancake, so they just get shredded. Bring this thing for some hit and runs. It does not have interceptor tuning. I think it should, but it has normal medium fighter tuning, so you just have to be extremely mindful. Play very defensive, get your ganks, then get out. Use stealth to your advantage, and just be extremely careful. But one-on-one, a Sabre can do a lot of work. Yeah, now with the increased turn rate, it's very viable, right? Definitely could take this thing out in Pyro for sure. You're gonna have difficult in Arena Commander because it's a confined space, so you can't really hide that well. But in the PU, lean on its mechanics, and you'll do well with it. Next up is the rest of the Hornets. So we've got the Hornet Ghost, so the F7C. That's the best Hornet when it comes to those series, and is still performing well. I rank it higher than the Ghost Mark II and the Tracker Mark II is because it actually has the nose turret. So you put a turret on the top, you put a turret on the bottom. It's got a lot of weapons still, and it's just downgraded sizes on both the nose and the roof. But stealth mechanics, yeah. So the detection range is still relatively high, higher than the Sabre, but it's got a lot more firepower, and it's not in a bad space. Also, these Hornets have really bad atmospheric flight in comparison, so keep that in mind. But Hornet F7C series, outdated, looks old, but still a powerful ship. Next up, the Hercules A2. I placed this high because it is so defensive. It can carry players in it, vehicles in it, huge bombs in it. It's bulky, doesn't place high as the Spirit A1 because it's not as fast and agile, so people can see you coming from a mile out. But bombing mechanics is just so powerful. You get objectives that are based on the ground, and the Hercules A2 is not going to let you down. Just make sure you don't get hit by your own bomb, and make sure someone's not tailing you behind, getting ready to shoot your bomb out of the bay and take you down with it. But the reason it ranks high is because bombing ranks high. Next up, Arrow. Arrow would be much higher if it wasn't, and it's a light fighter, obviously, but it would rank much higher if it didn't have terrible nose authority. Yogi and the team have given this thing a lot of oversteer, meaning it kind of feels laggy, like there's input lag on the nose. Oversteer is a horrible mechanic, and the Arrow's got a lot of oversteer in it, so just poor nose authority. Also, the size 1 decreases in damage for master modes is what's hurt it a little bit. It's tiny, almost a snub fighter, has the quantum jumping and navigation, but the nose authority leaves it down. Capable ship, for sure. You can beat a lot of opponents with this, especially when they're larger size. You can abuse the turn rate, but you're not going to win sweaty duels or 1v1s in this thing against other light fighters, for sure. So probably the furthest behind when it comes to light fighters. San'Tok.Yai, insanely powerful in atmosphere. It's got the alien flight to it, the alien flight characteristics. The 4 size 3s, it's tanky. It can take a beating, and the reason it places as high as it does purely based off of how well it performs in atmosphere. I've seen a lot of people do a lot of damage with these things in atmosphere. I would not take this thing out in space. I think you're going to get used and abused for being a larger ship, but not in a bad place. Yeah, not in a bad place. C, the Hurricane. Hurricane, look, I wouldn't bring this thing out in space, but in atmosphere where it is more of a cage match and people can't abuse ranges and speeds nearly as well, because that's what atmosphere is, right? Atmosphere starts to restrict the flight model to slower speeds, but do you know what stays the same speeds? Is the weapons. So you start coordinating between a pilot and the turret on one of these, and you start dominating airspace rapidly. You know, a good example, and the reason why is like, look at it like it's a tiger. If you're in a cage match with a tiger that is atmosphere, right? You're in a cage match, you've got an assault rifle and you're up against a tiger. You have to worry about this tiger mauling you before you're going to get shots into it, right? Now, change that to a football field distance away. The tiger's likely not going to get to you. So the Hurricane just performs really well in confined spaces and is a really powerful ship in atmosphere. Yeah, specifically. Not to say it's useless in space, it's still very capable, but strategies start to open up when you can abuse range and speeds to slowly pick this thing apart. But as far as a multi-crew 2-seater, the Hurricane performs really well. Next up is the Buccaneer. A lot of people be sitting there going, why is the Buccaneer rated so low? Because it's not a good ship, guys. It's a terrible ship. It actually recently got nerfed, so I've pulled it down some rankings since the last time it lost a shield. But the Buccaneer's just not been a good ship. I explained this last time. And the proof has been in the tournament that recently got played. If you brought a Buccaneer, I don't think you made it to the second stage of the event or of the tournament. But Interceptor is nice, of course, when you're using it for a support role. Interceptors are support-based classes, support-based ships. You do not want to main this ship. Why? Because it is pushing you in a direction that does not lean into master modes at all. You're not using turn rate. You are relying on flying away from your opponents the moment it gets scary, and it's going to get scary almost all of the time. You cannot brawl with this thing. You cannot dogfight with this thing. All you're doing is abusing speed to try and catch opportunistic kills and then leave before anyone is the wiser. Problem is if you put your whole group in these, then that's 5 Buccaneers all waiting for opportunities and not getting them. 5 Buccaneers does not beat 5 Hornets. 5 Buccaneers does not beat 5 Gladiuses. I don't even think 5 Buccaneers beats 5 Firebirds. Or 5 Blades. Or 5 Talons. Or 5 Furies. You get my point. It's a really low skill ceiling ship or skill entry, and you're just hindering yourself flying this. A lot of people try to make these work, and they don't work, yeah? And then if anything, you're not learning really how to fly and dogfight in these things. You're just kind of avoiding fighting and looking for opportunity. So there's just no value. There's no growth there. There's no strength there. If you're playing this, you're trying to abuse survival, and you're just making your team lose slower, if anything. Better to double down on your skills, lean into master mode's purpose, which is for fights to come to a conclusion and fight your way through the enemy rather than around and just outskirting them the whole time. You know, for example, if you take this thing in a squad battle, you can, maybe stay low on the deaths and, not get caught. But the problem is you're creating a number disadvantage for your team and your teammates getting cut up in the process. So just not a good ship. Yeah, I can't recommend not hopping in one of these enough. Yeah, like it's just, you're not learning anything from the game, not learning anything from flying it. And not a good ship. Never really was. Next up, we've got the Connie Andromeda. I placed the Andromeda, this high in the list because the Corsair got the nerf with the guns in the front. The Andromeda did not. It's got missiles, it's got guns. You can kind of play almost like the sniper who's just annoyingly hovering outside of the team fight, trying to pick opponents and look at weak opportunities where they can maybe snag kills. Problem is this ship is going to be the last in your group to die, but you have limited fighting options and you cannot fly this thing solo. You need to go in with a group of at least 5 so that they can protect you when people inevitably go after you. But because you're so tanky is why this ship performs pretty alright. I think engineering coming in early 2025 is going to sink this thing to the... I guess we're going to see where Monte-Crew goes too, but engineering is coming for this thing, so it won't be a solo seater anymore. But right now, it's got a lot to offer. Low skill ceiling, low skill entry, easy to fly one of these things. If you prefer to fly larger ships and not just be, Tom Cruise flying and dogfighting, then the Andromeda is for you for certain. And it's got some other purposes, yeah? Next up is the Khartu-Al. Surprising ship. It actually is extremely maneuverable for what it is. It's a large ship and it's really tanky. This thing is meant to 1v1. It is meant to brawl. It is meant to get up in your face and start abusing your lateral and vertical strafes to get around targets and wrap around them. And because it is broken up into different sections of the ship, it's difficult to isolate one of them to kill it. You're going to end up spreading your damage accidentally by trying to defend yourself and likely lose due to its tankiness and its maneuverability. Problem is anything outside of a 1v1, that starfish becomes far easier to kill. so it doesn't scale well. The larger the groups, the more this falls apart. But the Khartu-Al, you know, as far as like a bounty hunting ship or something like that, it's not a bad pick at all. Really interesting flight characteristics, very unique, really interesting cockpit experience, and so on. Next up is the Archimedes. Look, again, scumbags fly snub fighters because the game doesn't work with them, and it's miserable fighting these things. But the Archimedes has got decent flight. It's annoying. It's a pest. You shoot ballistics at it, it'll take damage critically and then die. Can't quantum jump, but for how agile these things are, they rank pretty decent on the list. I don't recommend hopping in one of these. I don't think there's much future in it, especially with the goal of being for the game to perform better, and these perform terrible. And they're quick to get nerfed the moment they get ridiculous. It's hard to stage out of one of these things. You have to pair it with a Polaris or an 890 or something along those lines. Obviously the Connies as well, but not bad flight characteristics. Same argument for the M50, although it does have navigation and can quantum jump around. It's a racing ship. It shouldn't have guns in my opinion, but an annoying pest that has to be dealt with for sure. This thing's not going to go toe-to-toe with any other fighter, but it's annoyingly capable. Yeah, its strength being maneuverability and flight. Next up, Corsair, multi-purpose. You've got the big guns. You're extremely tanky. You can kind of play that sniper role, that tanky sniper role on the outskirts of the fight. People are forced to deal with you, and if they don't, you can likely get a couple kill opportunities. If not, also great for hunting big whaling like Polarises and capital ships. Yeah, just not a bad pick for that role. It's got multi-crew options. You can start doing cargo stuff with it and stuff like that. Just not a bad pick. I wouldn't bring these things out competitively unless we're looking at like whaling Polarises and capitals. Yeah. Next up, so that's the CTR done. Next up, we've got the Hammerhead. Look how we're doing on time, 13 minutes. Okay, we're going to pick up a little bit of pace here. But the Hammerhead is the downside to this, and the reason it ranks kind of low is because it requires such a large player commitment to outfit this thing. But as far as dominating airspace and moving around as a group, the Hammerhead is a flying fortress. The problem is you're going to get picked apart at range. So you need some ships to defend you in that aspect, and to deal with that as a problem set. But as moving around and navigating around, you know, this thing has got a lot of firepower in atmosphere. It is extremely powerful. The only downside is people can pick you apart from range, which is where it ranks. It's also got a huge missile payload, an insane amount of missiles, an insane amount of flares and chaffs. It can keep defending itself for a long time, and creates a problem for your group. Yeah, you start flying close to this thing and your ships start to evaporate too. So I think this ship's misunderstood. A lot of people like the meme on it, and I think even a 20% buff to this thing in any aspect, and it's going to be probably at the very top of S tier. But it's, again, denying airspace. Keyword being airspace, not space itself, but airspace. You know, hovering one of these things, encircling jump town and stuff is pretty effective. Not a bad multi-crew option, yeah? Only issue and the downside is it will not outweigh bringing 6 ships instead of 6 players in turrets. Yeah, better to bring 6 ships. So it needs some loving. No surprise there, multi-crew does. But not a terrible ship. It's a D, which is not great at all, but not terrible. Next up, we have the Ghost Hornet Mark II. This is the new ship that came out in the last month. Problem and the downside to this ship is that it is not deep enough leaning into its own personality. Meaning, if you put stealth components inside of a Hornet Mark II F7A, the only advantage that the Ghost Mark II has is 500 meters of stealth. So 500 meters of detection. That is nowhere near compelling enough to justify losing the two nose guns on the F7A and the roof two guns on the F7A. So you are more than doubling your damage output by going in an F7A, only to trade that off for 500 meters more of stealth. So also worth noting, you can change the mount on the top, which increases the signature and reduces your stealth, but you cannot change or even put anything on the nose of the Ghost Mark II. We think it's a bug, we're not certain. But the Ghost Mark II cannot have any weapons on the nose, which means it is falling behind in damage immediately. It's only a little bit ahead of a Sabre, and the Sabre is much better stealth. So it's not outperforming the Sabre in stealth. It's barely outperforming the Sabre in damage. And it is only barely outperforming the Hornet Mark II F7A in stealth, at the cost of a lot of damage and firepower, and a weaker flight. So the Ghost Mark II kind of just fell flat on its face, and just really hasn't provided much. It's not compelling. It's underperforming. We want it to perform better, but we also don't want it to be at the very top of S tier, right? So you put a nose gun on this thing, it probably starts making its way up to the B tier. But where the Ghost Mark II is, it's just not worth the price you pay. Yeah, it's better to lean into the F7A Mark II, or even the Hornet Ghost Original Mark I F7C, because that's got more firepower options. So yeah, kind of just struggling to find its place. Is it to be more firepower and you give it some more weapons and then a little less stealth, or is it to give it more stealth and way more stealth and then keep the firepower as it is, which is relatively low for a Hornet, lowest for a Hornet? Again, the Hornet Tracker Mark II, same problem is the net benefit. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, because I have not tested this in the recent 4.0 patch since live, but the radar benefits of the Hornet Tracker Mark II are almost non-noticeable. And the great tracking mechanics that we're all hoping for example, providing missile tracking buffs to teammates, maybe increasing radar detection for your other teams with interlinks and stuff like that. Being able to ping out fleets or squads before they approach, or track stealth ships coming past. These mechanics are not in the game yet. And so all it is just a weaker performing tracker with a missing gameplay loop is what it feels like. So the Hornet Tracker is just not convincing at all. Yeah, it's got that decent hull. It's that decent defense still, but missing out on a lot of firepower. No reason to lean into the tracking mechanic right now either. Defender, bit of a home ship. You can bed log out in it and stuff like that. It's got a bit of cargo space. Really unique style. Hard to third party because look at the silhouette. Got 4 size 3s. The benefit to the Banu Defender has got a larger than normal capacitor, so it holds more weapons in the chamber. Guns or ammunition ready to go at your disposal, and just not a bad pick. Yeah, not a great pick, not a good pick, but not a bad pick. The advantage to this is bed logging out and the cargo space inside of it. Also, you can have a co-pilot in it, but there's no real use to that. Next up is the controversial one. This is the Mirai Guardian. So all of the new ships the last couple of months to be released have all ranked D, and the Guardian's no different. The issue with the Mirai Guardian is a multitude of things. It's kind of not found its personality yet. It is a heavy fighter. It is tanky, especially on the arms. It's not tanky in the center module. So if you're targeting this thing, you want to go for the center. Obviously not damage the wings, but aim for where it's critical. It's got large guns. The firepower is kind of all right. The large size of it defensively, not bad. The low speed of it, which is the heavy fighter archetype itself, very bad. The problem is with the master modes is that heavy fighters lack speed, they lack maneuverability, so they fall prey. Guardian's no different. If you bring a Guardian to a team fight, people are going to target you first because you're a large sitting duck. The interdiction is lower range than the Mantis. It doesn't have the speed to keep up with it. This Guardian is a missile magnet because it runs hot, and it's a large ship, so the signatures are gigantic. So it kind of just struggles. It's not a bad piracy ship. And maybe you could bring it to some small squadron compositions like 3v3s, stuff like that. But this thing is not going to outperform almost anything above it, especially in 1v1s. And it's kind of just lacking its purpose. Maybe if it had larger interdiction, that would be more beneficial. Make it more maneuverable, higher speeds. Then we're really talking about how great this thing is. Giving it more weapons, I don't think would solve anything either. So it's got the heavy fighter problem, yeah, which is not unique to the Guardian. So there you go. Next up, we have the Scorpius. Scorpius, two-seater, very agile, compelling in atmosphere. It's got some good flight when it comes to the atmosphere. It's an interesting silhouette. Multi-crew is not bad. Issue is it's a 2-player commitment. I wouldn't pick this thing, but it certainly isn't useless. Yeah, but not a bad ship. E, which that wraps up our D tier. Lastly, we have the E category, the Cutlass Blue. Look, guys, this is purely based off interdiction. Interdiction's in a great place. That's why the Cutlass is here. The Cutlass can brawl with large fighters and stuff like that. But the main reason this thing is here is because of that. Ares Inferno, I only put on E because I heard rumors of this thing doing pretty great when it comes to sub-targeting capital ships. And ships like the Connie or the Corsair. And it's using the ballistics. That is where its strength is. Sub-targeting larger ships in kind of whaling tasks, I guess. Yeah? But, look, you're barely going to bring this thing out. It's just barely above useless. But just not worth it. Just not worth it. It's really kind of just roleplay. Because even if you bring that out, why would you not just pick a Hornet Mark II with ballistic loadout instead? So I debate whether this thing should just be an F. It arguably probably should just be an F. The rest of the ships, guys, down here are really kind of just useless. The Titan is too big of a ship. It doesn't have much damage output. Like when you compare it to the Buccaneer, it's falling behind in damage. It does have interceptor tuning, so it is a support-based ship. You're looking for gank opportunities. The problem is, though, is you are going to get ganked in this thing. So the Titan, treat it like a starter ship. It's just not compelling. It's got a bit of cargo space and stuff because they're trying to give you some more use to it, but this thing you should not bring out competitively. The Shrike has just been replaced by the better man, which is the Firebird. The Shrike's supposed to be the stealth missile assassin. Bigger payloads in the Firebird, more lethal payloads in the Firebird, and it doesn't have that interceptor tuning. If the Shrike had interceptor tuning, it would be compelling and probably get halfway up that list, but because it doesn't, that's where it sits. Ares Ion, you're role-playing in this thing. It's supposed to be good for attacking capitals, but those guns kind of just have become outdated. It's just not performing well. And better to bring, if you want to hunt capital ships in big game, better just bring Hornets than an Ares Ion. Because while the Ares Ion is only going to be good at whaling and going after capital ships, etc., the Hornet can do both. It can do the same thing with similar damage output, but it can also dogfight, brawl, and go up against squad compositions and stuff like that. So why bring the Ion? It's a tragedy. Ion is one of my favorite ships, but it has not got a place in the meta right now, that is for sure. It's definitely useless for PvP. Warden, similar. It suffers the heavy fighter problem. It's got some damage. It is not gimbaled on the nose, which is a downside. The turret is also really small weapon sizes. This thing is to bring a better round. Yeah, this is a PU based ship to kind of live out of if possible, the weapon rack, etc. But this thing has fallen off. It's definitely a part of the heavy fighter problem, which is these ships are not maneuverable enough to compete and they get preyed upon. The Reliant, yeah, just not compelling. It's got a lot of guns to it, but so does the Hornet Mark II. And then the Hornet Mark II F7A has just got all this other features that the Reliant doesn't have. Doesn't have maneuverability and stuff like that. You fly the Reliant. I apologize. I know some of you are really in love with this thing, but you're role playing in it. The Hawk is a tiny ship. The problem with master modes is it's got the size 2s and 1s on it. That was a lot of damage pre-master modes, but now that in master modes, the higher the weapons are, the more damage they do. Not frequency or the amount of small weapons will help. So it lost a lot of damage output with master modes. It is not agile enough for how small this thing is. It's almost the size of a mosquito fighter, yet it kind of performs sluggish. Bad nose authority, a lot of oversteer, feels sluggish for what it is, and the damage output's lower in comparison that has it been in the past. So I desperately want to see the Hawk buffed. If there was anything on this list I think really needs to get buffed, it's the Hawk. Kind of mystifies me why this thing hasn't been any form of competitive for multiple years. Gladiator just outperformed when it comes to missiles. The torpedo gameplay is rather average right now. The other missiles can be better used from a Firebird, even a Strike. The missiles aren't convincing. The multi-crew is kind of pointless. The one thing it's got going for it is it is extremely tanky. Freelancer miss, I haven't seen one of these in at least 3 or 4 years. Just why bring it over a Firebird? Like you're going to use a Freelancer miss to punch above your weight. The problem is when you're punching above your weight, for example, going after a Polaris or something, the last thing you want to use is missiles. So this thing's going to get targeted first in your group. It's going to die quickly and pay the price for being a cargo ship with missiles on it. The Glaive I rank lower, and it's really unfortunate the Glaive and the Scythe, they have weapon convergence issues, and they're not auto gimbaled like the other guns are on other ships, so they don't have that mechanic now to help with their aim assist. Also, their capacitor sizes didn't get changed with the 4.0 patch, so they've got low ammo count. Just an overlooked ship, broken in many aspects, missing crucial mechanics that other ships got. Look at the Glaive as if it's broken, guys. I know a lot of people love this thing, but it isn't modern and needs to have a complete overhaul because the weapon convergence using this thing, it's just not practical or effective, really. Eclipse is paying the price of the torpedo gameplay right now. Torpedoes get PDC'd or they miss or they don't perform well over the network. So Eclipse is best maybe used dumb firing at Polarises if you can manage to get it aligning correctly with the lag and in the PU and stuff like that. But ultimately you're role playing it. Better to kill a Polaris with something else anyways, or larger ships. Ultimately, it's a torpedo problem. When torpedoes get reviewed, looked at, and they try to make that gameplay more interesting, then we'll revisit the Eclipse. But for now, you wouldn't want to bring this thing out. Almost never. Like very few times could you bring this thing out for a very limited target package, and you're barely going to run into that. Retaliator, same problem. Banking on all torpedoes isn't reliable at all in PvP. You'd be lucky to get a torpedo to land. And even if you did, you probably need another 30 of them. Yeah, so just not reliable, not useful, broken alongside torpedoes. Scythe broken for the same reason as the Glaive. I know the Ballista isn't a ship, but I placed it in here anyways because I think it's important to know just how far this thing fell from grace. The Ballista was a awesome projection of power from ground to air. and really worked great with anti-air because it was almost impossible to detect, and the missiles were extremely effective. Those missiles aren't as effective now, but the glory days of the ballista feel like they're over. I haven't seen one used efficiently since Master Modes, and it's a shame. Yeah, I hope for this thing to make its way back up to ranks, maybe with some unique missiles that have far better tracking or something along those lines. But the ballista's fallen off, and it's a shame. I really thought giving power to FPS players to be able to project an AA or anti-air was a really well-balanced mechanic, and it's sad to see it kind of fizzle out. Lastly is the Raven. The Raven's just the worst ship we've got right now. Full stop. Next to no weapons. It's got the 2 size 3s and that's it. EMP gameplay, electronic warfare gameplay. The EMPs are really weak. To land a kill on this thing, you need the stars to align because you're an interceptor tuning based ship. So you're trying to do a strafe run, come at a target that's already low on shields, if not the shields are down, then EMP it. Problem is when you're versing ships like the Hornet, the F8C, that EMP isn't going to turn them off. They're going to survive it, and then you've accomplished nothing. So it requires the stars to align just to get a single kill, whereas a Hornet could have killed 20 players by the time that Raven's found a single opportunity to land a kill. Not saying this thing's useless in piracy or anything along those lines, but your role playing, you could be in something way better. And it's just not viable. It is the worst ship right now, which is a shame because I love it, but it is the worst. When I look at this list, I think the Ares Inferno being an E is probably up to debate. Is the Hammerhead there correctly? Maybe that could go some positions. And then my extreme love for the bombing mechanic, which is the Spirit A1 and A2. Those could be susceptible to change. You could move them at the back of the A tier or something along those lines, but being able to squad wipe groups on the ground is still shouldn't be overlooked. So I think there's some debate for the Hammerhead and the bombers, and there's probably some debate for maybe the Antares, where that's placed a little bit. Like maybe you could move that little to the right or something along those lines, but grossly misunderused still. But I'm very confident that that's almost entirely accurate. I wouldn't change anything. I believe that's truly where things sit. And that's it. Yeah. Awesome. That's the video, guys. I re-recorded it and we're at an hour. Go figure. Why did I record this twice? Guys, I appreciate you. 1, 2, 3 if you got this far. Yeah. Look, I'm streaming on Twitch and YouTube every night almost. Make sure you guys are all morning for Americans. Make sure you guys stop by. I appreciate you. Hit me up in the comment. Let me know what you guys think. Debate me on this. I'll be there in the comments defending myself with a stick, I'm sure. GG's. I'll catch you guys next time, yeah? Peace.